So it's a classic situation of the apron being pumped full of grease. There was swarf stuck all over it. I mean, oil would attract swarf. So I think I'm going to have to pull that apart and clean it up. Right, so the grease is very black in places, so it's presumably been in there for quite a little while. And as far as I can tell, it's not done the lathe any damage at all, not at this position in its functionality, and it's not caked with swarf or anything. However, as it's intended to be run with an oil that soaks through the oilite bearings, I'm going to do that because presumably the grease won't soak through the oilite bearings, and you're in danger of leaving the bearing surface between the bearing in there and the steel shaft under lubricated. Anyway, I've decided to clean it out. Well, how not to do it? I'm using an airline to blast away the dirt from the crevices on here, but well away from the rest of the lathe, and I'll give it a good clean up. I'm having difficulty getting this thing out from the half nuts. But the main thing I think about these, well, just to make sure that they slide well, is there was swarf trapped in these threads, which is going to stop the half nut gripping properly. And I've got a sharp pointed device, well, a sharp screwdriver would do. Oh, it's under there, trapped under there. This thing, which I can use to scribe inside there, toothbrush and paraffin. And if I get that clean, flood that with something to just clean it and then re-lubricate it. I'm hoping that'll be all right. I'm wondering whether it's going to be worth taking the handle off, that moves reasonably smoothly, or just letting the oil gradually flush through for the lubrication of that. We'll see. So I'm not doing, as you will see on YouTube, in other areas, a full strip down rebuild. I'm trying to get it back to a good, usable condition. Certainly better than it was. It was usable as I bought it, definitely, but hopefully improving a little on that. What I'm finding useful for cleaning out these V-grooves, which were caked with dried up oil, I guess, is coffee stirrer. And if you break the coffee stirrer, you get left with end grain. So it's like the end grain acts a little bit like a brush. So paraffin is my current cleaning solution, and that allows me to get into the corner and just use the wood. And it's good for scraping the surface as well. Hopefully gentle enough so it won't damage paintwork. A bit of solvent to soften up the caked on residues, and then the wood is rather gentler than a screwdriver. And the other tool for more stubborn things is this wedge of wood, and it means I can just scrub along there, and it helps me just shift a few things which I've stuck onto the machine. Okay, that's now cleaned and oiled. You can support it with a finger. And you can see that spinning around nicely. Not an awful lot of difference, but the lathe is all cleaned. Not the lathe. I mean the cross slide, apron, top slide parts here have all been cleaned and oiled, disassembled mostly down to individual components, not quite all the way. There might be a little bit of adjustment of jib strips to be done. I did put new oil nipples in because there was evidence certainly for the apron that grease had been used for oiling that. So I thought it best to just replace the oil nipples and clean out all the oil ways. Well, that should be restoring it to its correct lubrication condition. I've just taken this oil nipple out, and what I'm finding is, I don't know if you can, been forcing oil into it. Oh, pulled too much of it out. What I'm assuming is grease, which has been forced into a bronze or sintered bronze bearing. But I'm going to hope that putting the right sort of oil through it will dilute the grease and eventually clear it out. Anyway, if you come across this video and you have any really useful ways of doing that other than taking this whole thing off, it would have to come off the end of the shaft. You'd presumably have to press out the bronze bearing, clean that, clean out the rest of it, and then put the whole bit back. And I'm not sure I really need to go to all that extreme, because it is spinning reasonably well now. Spinning better since I squeezed some of the oil through, so I think the oil is bypassing the grease to some extent. Well, a part answer to that is that with the oil nipple out and my Raylang oil gun, I've been able to get a fair bit of pressure by, it's a brass tip on here, so of course it forms quite a nice seal and allowed me to put quite a bit of pressure, and I did see some oil appear here, so it's going down through there. It's forcing, I'm able to force its way through the bush so that it does appear on the shaft. So for a few times, I think what I'm going to do is remove the oil nipple and inject oil that way to lubricate it. And the other aspect is I don't foresee making that much use of it, so if I just do a good bit of lubrication each time I want to use it, I think I'll be all right. And on the assumption that grease has been used on these nipples, you'll see something caked onto the end there, onto that collar. And I don't know if you can see it kind of caked around there. I know oil occasionally dries and cakes a bit if left a long time. That means I'm probably going to have to strip and clean that. Unlike my decision to not strip and clean the one on the cross screw, the screw cutting place down there. That I'm happy that that's working all right, and I've cleaned out the oil nipple as well, which was choked up. That's one where, away from the lathe, I'm quite happy to use the airline and a bit of solvent material. Well, it certainly looks like it was grease that was down there. Let's have a look. And black and sticky. Black and sticky stuff in both of those. It's an understandable mistake for somebody who's not been on the forums and asked or read the manuals, and it's just an excuse or opportunity for me to strip and clean and check the bearings and hope that they're not badly worn. Oh my goodness, it's like turning something through treacle. That is really quite stiff to turn. Yeah, looking forward to this. Okay, so this situation, I've taken the two grub screws out of there and the two grub screws out of there. Both of these are pretty tight. That pulley and this triple pulley. Basically it fairly well seized on. I've tried hitting the end of this with a drift to move the shaft through because there's space. That's not moving anywhere. This hasn't moved. It's keyed on. However, flushing diesel into all the holes to try and do some freeing off. I've not got ATF. I've been using diesel. And I think you can see that it's cleaned off the grease and it's no longer spinning as if it was in tar. It's nice and solid. I mean, it's not wobbling about. It doesn't appear as though there's any significant wear. And so if I can't, I'm going to go and have a cup of tea. If the diesel hasn't penetrated enough, I think if you're really, really worried about something being seized, you'd leave it for about a week. But I'll give it half an hour or so. Then I'll have another little go at releasing it. And if not, I'll just clean up everything I can see and continue with this flushing through until I can flush some nice clean oil through. That's the plan. We'll see how that develops. Because look, that's much, much nicer. And you can see all the black stuff on there that has come out. All the dirty, you can maybe see a bit in there. Maybe not. I can see it, but black gunge coming out. Yeah, I don't like the sound of that as I slide it in and out, but once it's in position, it spins nicely. Not sure how clearly you can see the ridge between the smooth shaft and the build-up of residue of what has come out from lubrication in there. That will clean off. Yes, that's cleaner. But just see, watch this. It's gone into the bearing. As it comes out of the bearing, you can see the black line of all the black gunge. So we need to clear out of that bearing. But the solvents I'm using, diesel basically, maybe a bit of paraffin, are flushing the dirt out. Well, these two pulleys are still solid on there. If I got them off, what would I do? I'd be able to do a bit better cleaning job, but the burrs on the shaft where these grub screws have bitten into it would be scoring the bushes as you extract the shaft. If you were able to, whichever way you push it, where these grub screws have gone in, there are going to be burrs on the shaft. There's already small burrs on it here. So as it is, I just want to show you flush through, and I've forced some oil in. I've seen the oil come out at the ends. You can see it now coming out at this end, the oil. See the blackness there, and that is now spinning quite nicely. And I think with further oiling, that will only improve. Nice and smooth running in there. I don't see any need to strip it down because it is a good bearing, I believe. You know, no play, no movement in it. I think it's really, really good. And with that cleaning up, flushing of the grease out as much as I can, and forcing through of oil, we've improved that considerably, and it will improve as I get more oil through it and run it. So that's going to stay in situ. You can see how everything else got caked up underneath. We can do a cosmetic clean on those. So the only other thing then at this end that I'm worried about, clearly because these got oil cups on, it will have had oil into the headstock bearings. I can't imagine. Yeah, of course it will have. But we do have a grease nipple down there, and we do have a grease nipple when I say grease nipple, an oil nipple, which could well have received some grease. And so in these situations, that's the back gear. It does feel, it feels on the stiff side. I think that's going to be a matter of cleaning up the dirt that's around there and forcing some oil through. I don't plan at this stage to do a full headstock strip down. It's not as if the bearings are worn out. Cleaning of the gear teeth to get the swarf off. As I say, that's cleaned up quite nicely. At this end, all running quite well, apart from the fact that somewhere about that position on one of these cogs, there's a little bit of tooth damage, which you can feel as you're turning it, for further consideration. It's certainly free enough to do fine feeding or even screw cutting if you want that one, but you know, it's be worth looking at the teeth at some stage. I'm pleased to see that by filling the grub screw holes with oil before putting them in, I can hydraulic out some oil from around the pulley, so that's forcing a bit of oil around those bits. So even though the pulley is seized on, I've got some oil around it. Not that it's a bearing surface or anything, but it should do some good in there. It's not the freest, because I think there's still a little bit of the grease turning to tar under this pulley against the spindle, and in there where that oil nipple is. But I don't intend to use the back gear very often, but it is certainly turning pretty reasonably well now, and I think with oil flushing through it, I'll achieve the same as I achieved with the intermediate shaft up there, where that is now spinning very freely in its bearings, having flushed out the grease and replaced it with oil. And I'm most of the way through doing that down here, and I think it can be left now, and as long as I just keep oiling it, it should improve. That's my hope, that's my thought, because I don't plan to take the headstock apart, because the bearings seem very nice and don't want to disturb anything that's running nicely.